Welcome, my friend. The storm rages outside, but here, in the quiet of this story, I invite you to find peace. Let the sound of the rain and the distant thunder guide you as you drift into a place of calm. This story is my gift to you, a gentle companion for a night of restful sleep. Relax, let go of the day, and let the story carry you into dreams. The night had been uneventful up until now. I had been driving for hours, the only company being the hum of the engine and the occasional hiss of the windshield wipers battling against the downpour. The storm had been relentless all evening, but I was used to it. A trucker's life isn't exactly predictable, and that's part of the job. Keep your eyes on the road, and you'll be fine. It was just past midnight when I pulled up to a small rest area. I wasn't planning on stopping, but my coffee had long since turned cold, and my eyes were starting to feel heavy. I needed a quick break, just enough to stretch my legs and shake off the fatigue. There were a couple of cars parked, but no one else seemed to be around. I got out of the truck, stretched my back, and looked up at the sky. The storm raged on, and the wind howled as though it was angry at the world. But that's when I noticed something strange. At the far end of the lot, there was a figure standing in the shadows. I couldn't make out the details at first, just a silhouette, barely visible in the rain. It didn't move. It just stood there. I shook my head, chalking it up to my tired mind playing tricks on me. Who else would be out here at this hour? And besides, it was way too dangerous to be standing out in the middle of a storm like this. I climbed back into the cab and started the truck. But before I could shift into gear, I heard a tap on the window. My heart jumped in my chest. There, standing in the rain, was a woman. She looked normal enough, except her eyes, which were wide with desperation. She was drenched, her hair clinging to her face, her clothes soaked through. "Can I get a ride?" she asked, her voice muffled by the rain and the glass. I hesitated. Something about her just didn't sit right with me. I've been a trucker long enough to know when something feels off. But she was standing there in the storm, and I couldn't just leave her out there, could I? I rolled down the window a little. "It's a bad storm out there," I said. "You sure you want to get in?" She nodded quickly, almost too eagerly. "Please, I'll pay you back. I just need to get to the next town." I looked at her again, scanning her face for any sign of deceit, but all I saw was fear. Fear that almost seemed too real. I sighed, deciding it wasn't worth arguing. "All right, hop in." She climbed into the passenger seat with a grateful smile. But as soon as the door closed, the air inside the truck felt colder. The storm outside seemed to grow louder, the wind howling even more fiercely. "So where are you headed?" I asked, trying to break the silence. She didn't answer at first. Instead, she just stared straight ahead, her hands tightly gripping the seatbelt. "I'm just passing through," she finally said, her voice low, almost too quiet. "Trying to get away." I gave her a quick glance. Get away from what? But before she could respond, I saw something that made my blood run cold. In the reflection of the side mirror, I saw a pair of headlights coming up fast behind us. But there was no car, no vehicle, just the headlights, floating, moving toward us at an unnatural speed. I glanced over at the woman. She wasn't looking at me, her gaze fixed on the road ahead. But I could see her hands shaking. I didn't know what to think. Was I just tired? Was it the storm messing with my head? But the headlights, they were getting closer, faster, as though they were closing in on us. I tried to shake off the feeling of dread creeping up my spine. "Must be another truck," I muttered to myself. But I couldn't help feeling like something wasn't right. Suddenly the lights from behind vanished, just as quickly as they had appeared. I glanced over at the woman again. But this time, she was staring at me. Her eyes were wide, almost familiar, but something was off. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, unreadable expression. I was about to ask if she was okay when I noticed something even stranger. Her reflection in the side mirror wasn't right. She was still in the truck, but the reflection, it didn't match. It was blurry, fading in and out like a broken image. Her face flickered between fear and something darker. Something unnatural. I felt a chill run down my spine as I quickly turned my head to look at her. But she wasn't there anymore. I was alone. I couldn't believe it. 1 second, she was sitting right next to me, her wet hair clinging to her face. And then nothing. Just empty air. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles were turning white. I slammed on the brakes, the truck screeching against the wet road as I searched frantically for any sign of the woman. There was nothing. No sign of her in the cab. No trace of wet footprints on the floor. But the rain, it kept pouring. The storm hadn't let up one bit. It felt like the whole world was drowning in it. And the longer I sat there staring at the empty passenger seat, the more it felt like the storm was closing in, pushing me towards something darker. I looked around, half expecting to see her standing in the shadows, waiting for me to open the door again. But the rest area was deserted. The parking lot was eerily still, just the occasional flicker of the streetlight struggling against the downpour. I wiped my face with my sleeve, trying to shake off the cold sweat that was forming on my skin. Maybe I was just seeing things. Maybe I was more tired than I thought. I had been on the road for too long, after all. I reached for the radio, hoping some music would help drown out the unease that was gnawing at me. But just as I turned the dial, the static kicked in, crackling like a storm of its own. Then, clear as day, a voice came through. "Why'd you leave me?" My heart skipped a beat. It was her voice, the woman's voice. But this time it wasn't just a soft request. It was an accusation, a harsh whisper, as if she were right next to me. I whipped my head around, my pulse racing, but there was still no one in the truck. "Why'd you leave me, driver?" The voice repeated, louder this time, almost desperate. "I needed your help." I quickly turned off the radio, my breath coming in short, ragged bursts. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. The whole situation felt wrong. Every instinct in me screamed that something was deeply, deeply off. I shook my head and muttered to myself, trying to stay grounded. It's just the storm, just the exhaustion messing with my head, nothing else. But then I looked down at the dashboard. The seatbelt light was on. I blinked, my heart pounding in my chest. I was the only one in the truck. And yet, the passenger seatbelt was clicking as if someone were sitting there. It pulled tight, and I could feel the vibrations of someone buckling in next to me. I froze. Slowly I reached for the seatbelt. My hand shook as I pulled it back to its resting position. But the clicking sound persisted. Each click felt like a countdown. Something was coming. Something was here. A flash of lightning illuminated the road ahead, and for a split second, I saw it again. The silhouette, standing just beyond the truck, in the middle of the rain-soaked parking lot. The same woman. Her face no longer pleading, no longer fearful, was twisted into a cold, emotionless stare. Before I could even process what I was seeing, the truck's engine sputtered, the lights flickered, and the radio crackled back to life, as though someone had turned the volume up to full blast. "Help me, driver," the voice whispered once more. This time it sounded like it was coming from the back of the cab. "Help me and you'll leave this place. But if you don't, you'll stay with me forever." I didn't have to think twice. The panic flooded me all at once, and I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, accelerating faster than I ever had before. The engine roared to life, and I tore down the wet road, the headlights cutting through the storm like a knife through fog. But no matter how fast I went, the image of her face, the woman, haunted me in the rearview mirror. She was still there, always there, chasing me. Her hollow eyes seemed to follow me, even as I sped away. I didn't know what was real. All I knew was I had to get out of it. But that voice, it was still with me. It wasn't going anywhere. I kept driving. My hands were white-knuckled on the wheel. My foot pressed hard against the accelerator. The rain continued to pour down, the wipers struggling to keep up with the relentless onslaught. The storm seemed to have a life of its own, as if it was trying to swallow the entire road. Each flash of lightning revealed the endless stretch of highway, but it didn't comfort me. It only deepened the feeling that I was being watched. The woman's voice, soft and desperate, was still in my head. "Help me, driver." It echoed in my mind, over and over. I glanced in the rearview mirror again, but this time, There was nothing there. No figure, no movement, just the dark, rain-soaked highway behind me, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I wasn't alone. I never had been. I pulled my eyes back to the road ahead, trying to focus. But something was off. It wasn't just the storm, the voice, or the haunting image of her in the rearview mirror. No, it was the road itself. The pavement beneath my tires seemed to stretch longer, curving in ways it shouldn't. I'd driven this route hundreds of times, but now it felt different. The road was wrong. It felt like it was twisting, bending, as if it was alive. Was I going in circles? I tried to convince myself that I was just exhausted, that my mind was playing tricks. But the signs weren't right. I had passed the same exit sign 3 times in the last 5 minutes. I glanced at the fuel gauge. It was almost empty, but I hadn't passed any stations. The lights from the truck's dashboard flickered, and for a moment I saw the reflection of someone in the passenger seat. It wasn't the woman, it was me, but the reflection wasn't right. The eyes in the mirror were hollow, empty, like those of the woman. I blinked, and the reflection was gone. I let out a shaky breath. My mind was unraveling. I knew it. I had to pull over. I couldn't take this anymore. I slowed the truck and pulled off to the side of the road. The truck barely rolled to a stop, and as I shifted into park, I realized how quiet it had become. The storm outside had faded, almost as if it had never been there. The only sound now was the faint hum of the truck's engine and my own ragged breathing. And then tap. It came from the passenger window. I didn't have to look. I knew. I just knew. The woman. I turned slowly, my heart hammering in my chest, and there she was, standing outside the truck, her face pressed against the glass, staring at me with those dark, hollow eyes. She wasn't soaked anymore, but she was there, standing in the rain, watching me. "Let me in," she whispered, her voice a low rasp. "Please. Let me in." I didn't answer. I couldn't. The voice in my head screamed at me to drive, to get away, to not open the window. But my body felt frozen, like I was rooted to the spot, unable to move. I looked down at the door handle. My hand trembled as I reached for it. But before I could touch it, the woman tapped again. Her face now inches from the glass. Grin. "It's too late, driver," she said. Again, the truck shook violently, as though something huge had slammed into it. The air inside the cab grew cold, so cold I could see my breath in front of me. The lights flickered, and the rain outside came back with a vengeance, pouring down like a waterfall, each drop splashing against the truck with a force that made the vehicle tremble. Bang! The side window shattered. Glass flew everywhere, but there was no sound. The woman was gone. The storm outside intensified, drowning everything in its fury. I jumped in my seat, heart racing. The shattered window was still there, but the air was different now, heavy. I looked around the truck, but there was no sign of it. Nothing but the storm, now roaring with an intensity that rattled my bones. But then, I saw it, in the rearview mirror, her face, but it wasn't behind me. It was reflected in the glass, staring right at me from the passenger seat. She wasn't outside anymore. She was inside. The temperature in the truck dropped sharply, the air thick with the unnatural chill of dread. I turned my head, slowly, too afraid to move too quickly. She was there sitting in the passenger seat, but her face, that face was wrong. She was smiling now, but it wasn't a smile of relief or gratitude. It was twisted, mocking, almost like she was enjoying my fear. The storm outside raged even harder. The truck's frame creaked under the pressure, and the wind howled, bending the metal and shaking the windows. Lightning flashed, and in the brief strobe of light, I saw her more clearly. She was no longer soaked, no longer trembling, but her eyes, those empty black pits, were locked onto mine, her smile stretching impossibly wide. "You can't leave me now, driver," she whispered, her voice low, almost sweet, but cold as ice. "You brought me in. Now you stay with me, forever." I recoiled, my heart pounding so hard, I thought it might break free from my chest. I tried to speak, but no words came. My breath caught in my throat. As I looked at the rearview mirror again, the road had vanished. It was as if we were driving through a tunnel of blackness, the storm swallowing the world around us. the road stretching on endlessly in front. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't cooperate. It was like I was paralyzed, rooted to the seat, unable to escape. You made the choice, the woman continued, her voice growing louder, more forceful. You brought me in. You'll never leave this road. You'll never be free. Suddenly, the truck jolted forward, the engine roaring to life on its own, the tires skidding across the wet pavement. I gripped the wheel, but it was no use. The truck was driving itself now, pulling me deeper into the storm, deeper into the endless blackness. I glanced to my side, but the woman, she was gone. I whipped my head back to the road, desperate for some kind of control. But the road, it wasn't a road anymore. It was a void. Nothing but an endless stretch of darkness and rain. No signs. No markings. Just an infinite stretch of black. And then I saw it. A shadow. No. Not just a shadow. Something huge. Blocking the road ahead. The truck screeched to a halt. But the shadow didn't move. It was like it was waiting for me. I leaned forward, straining to see through the windshield. A flash of lightning illuminated the figure, and I nearly fell out of my seat in shock. It was her, the woman, but now, she was different. She was tall, taller than any human being should be. Her limbs stretched unnaturally long, her face now completely devoid of any human traits. Her eyes were hollow, like dark wells, her mouth twisted in an unholy grin. You shouldn't have picked me up, she hissed, her voice echoing through the truck, reverberating in my skull. Now you'll join me forever. My hands were shaking uncontrollably as I slammed my foot on the gas again. But the truck didn't budge. The woman's shadow grew larger. The air around me felt thick, like I was drowning in it. And then in that horrifying moment of realization, I knew this was no storm. This was a trap that had been waiting for me, for anyone. And now, I was stuck in it, bound to the road forever. The woman stepped forward, her distorted figure blocking the path ahead, her hand reaching for the cab door, and as her fingers touched the handle, the truck rattled violently, the windows shattering in a wave of glass and noise. I screamed, but it was no use. My voice was swallowed by the storm. The road before me split open, revealing an abyss, a gaping endless void that stretched downward into darkness. The truck lurched toward it, as if pulled by an invisible force. No, I shouted, but my words were lost in the roar of the storm. I don't want this. The woman's twisted smile widened even further. You're already mine. With one last horrific jolt, the truck tipped over the edge. I felt my stomach lurch as the ground below gave way, the truck tumbling through the air, and just as I thought we'd crash, just as the darkness swallowed me whole, I heard one final laugh. The woman's laugh. It wasn't just in my ears. It was in my head. It was everywhere. And then, everything went silent. I woke up to the sound of rain. It was soft at first, like a distant whisper, but then it grew louder, the rhythmic patter of drops against metal. I felt the cold, damp air brushing against my face. My eyes snapped open, but everything was dark. It wasn't the kind of darkness that comes with sleep, though. It was suffocating, like I was buried in a tomb of nothingness. I sat up quickly, heart racing. My mind was foggy, still trying to make sense of what had just happened. The truck, the woman, the storm. It all felt like a nightmare. But the air around me was too real, too cold. I blinked, trying to clear the haze, and slowly I realized where I was. I was still in the truck. No, it wasn't the truck. It was the same truck. But everything was wrong. The interior was decayed, rusted, like it had been sitting in a graveyard for years. The seats were cracked. The steering wheel had strange markings on it, and the dashboard lights flickered erratically. I turned my head slowly, the weight of the situation sinking in. The storm was gone now. The heavy, suffocating rain had stopped, and the air outside seemed oddly still. I couldn't hear the sound of the highway, or any wind. It was just silence. I stepped out of the truck and onto the ground, my legs unsteady as I found myself standing on a stretch of cracked asphalt. It wasn't the road I remembered. This place, this dead place, looked like it had been forgotten by time. I turned back toward the truck, but it was gone. There was no truck, no storm, no woman. I was standing alone in an empty, barren landscape, the night sky above me black as coal. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I looked around. I had no idea where I was, or how I had gotten here. The silence hung in the air like a weight. It was unnatural. The world felt empty. And then tap. I heard it. A tap. Soft at first, like a fingernail against glass. I spun around, my pulse quickening. There, standing in the distance, was the woman. She was no longer the twisted figure she had been. Now she was just a person. Her face normal, no longer distorted. But her eyes, they were still empty, hollow, like they had no soul behind them. She smiled at me, but it wasn't the kind of smile you want to see. It was cold, knowing. Did you think you could escape? She asked softly. You were never meant to leave. Not this road. I took a step back, my heart racing. What do you want from me? I managed to choke out. My voice felt weak, like it was being swallowed by the emptiness around me. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she began to walk toward me, her feet making no sound on the cracked pavement. You're part of this road now, she whispered. You always have been, and you'll never leave. I felt the ground beneath me tremble, a low rumble that grew louder with every step she took. The road beneath me began to crack open, the asphalt splitting as if the earth itself was pulling me down into it. Please, I begged, my voice breaking. I didn't mean to. I was just trying to help. But she didn't stop walking. Her eyes never left mine, and her smile grew wider, colder. You're here now, and you'll stay here, she said softly. Forever. The earth cracked open wide beneath me, and before I could react, I was falling into the void. And the last thing I heard, just before the darkness consumed me, was her laugh. That cold, hollow laugh. And then, silence.